Awesome. Thanks so much, Carter. And now I'm excited to present Elizabeth Stark. And we're going to have a fun little chat down history lane, talking about the history of Bitcoin and what the new innovation that we have in this space means.
Test. Fun fact, I actually bought coffee with Dogecoin at a coffee truck in San Francisco in early 2014. So that was Doge Mania back then.
Was it easier to actually transact with Dogecoin back then than it is now?
It was early days, so yeah, I think it was maybe more functional.
I remember like 16, 17, we had a bunch of ATMs also down in San Francisco. But Elizabeth, you've been in the space for a while, and you've seen Bitcoin evolve from like a new paradigm for digital money to you being kind of a pioneer in the first L2 to various different iterations of innovation, whether it's ordinal stacks and the new L2s that are kind of emerging, some being more innovative than others. But curious, like platforms are built on network effects, which are ultimately defined by the network itself and the people and participants in the network, which is a community. Would love to hear a bit about kind of the evolution and what it was like in the early days and the community's ethos around developing in BTC.
Well, yeah, so excited to be here. As mentioned, I'm CEO and founder of a company called Lightning Labs, and we are the lead developers of LND, which is a Lightning Network implementation and the leading implementation for Bitcoin. And yes, Layer 2 has been something I've been working on for a very long time, and it's kind of funny where back in the day everyone was like, what is that? And now all of a sudden it's this catchphrase. So we may disagree on what L2 means, but we can get to that as well. So early days, there was this concern in the community around scaling Bitcoin. In fact, the initial email that Satoshi sent, Halloween 2008, proposing Bitcoin and sending out the original paper, didn't get a response, like right away. But then a couple days later, the first response was this random guy on the internet who said, sounds like a really cool project, but I don't believe it can scale to the required size. So the initial reaction to the proposal of Bitcoin was a scaling question. And my background is at the intersection of law, technology, and generally things like CS economics and so on. And the architecture of the internet and the fact that the internet was built in layers, and people might be familiar with what's called the OSI stack, means that you don't put all the complexity at the base layer, the way that the internet was built up. I'm sure folks are familiar with TCP/IP, HTTP, and various protocols that build on top of each other. And similarly, with Bitcoin, folks are likely familiar in the audience, but for those that may not be, you've got on average 10-minute block times. Today, maybe 10 transactions per second, if you're lucky. And then, of course, you can have fees that spike. And there's a fee market, right, and all that. And this isn't always intuitive to people, and folks in the room probably know this, but on Bitcoin, you pay fees on the basis of space used, much like other chains. On Lightning, though, you pay fees on the basis of a percentage of the transaction. So there's actually a bips or basis points versus bytes component that we can get to that's relevant to Lightning and why people are using that for small value transactions. But in the early days, this idea of building a layer on top of Bitcoin was, some people called it crazy. They said, we don't know what you're building, but this doesn't make any sense. They thought, okay, Bitcoin didn't even make any sense, but this whole Layer 2 Lightning thing was never going to work, never going to happen. Lots of doubters. That's how you know maybe you're onto a good idea. And building this Layer 2 on Bitcoin required various changes to the protocol. Folks are likely familiar with hard forks versus soft forks, but for those that are not, a hard fork is not backward compatible, and a soft fork is. Bitcoin has never intentionally had a hard fork. We've had many soft forks. And until about 2016 era, the soft forks that were backward compatible, the upgrades and changes to the protocol and consensus were fairly standard, and they were not controversial, and things changed. And folks may have heard of the block size wars. Highly recommend reading Jonathan Beer's book on the matter, called The Block Size Wars. And what this really was, it was a lot of things. And I remember I used to just sit on my computer on the weekend and catch up on all the latest updates and what was going on, and there were a variety of proposals to change the block size in Bitcoin, which would have been a hard fork, which was backward, was not backward compatible. And then there were competing proposals around a soft fork. And in fact, the soft fork called segregated witness was one that Lightning Network also needed because it fixed something called malleability in Bitcoin, which actually was this bug of sorts that was there in the early days that this enabled. And for example, on Lightning, you have what we call payment channels. Without this upgrade to Bitcoin, you could not have indefinite channels. You just couldn't open a channel and have it there for a long duration. And there were a variety of other things that just didn't work without this upgrade, right? So long story short, there was a lot of drama, a lot of people fighting, a lot of internet memes. There were people that wanted the kind of easy path to just increase the block size, but would have required a hard fork, but it was kind of kicking the can down the road. Because once you increase the block size, well, then more people would fill it up. It's kind of like, okay, you have a highway with more lanes, and you add one more lane, and then lo and behold, it's just traffic again. And then you have to add another lane, and you cannot have a 12-lane highway, right? And the goal to scale in layers was one where you could move especially smaller value transactions that were not economically viable from the base layer to a layer 2, and then enable this, I somewhat analogize it to say, like, okay, now you can fly across as opposed to having the highway with lots and lots of lanes. So there were a variety of proponents on a variety of sides of this endeavor, and at the end of the day, Bitcoin did not hard fork. There were numerous attempts to do so, numerous proposals. I remember being in a room, by the way, of CEOs in the industry, and somebody asked if they supported what was called SegWit2x, which was this idea to first have segregated witness and then have a hard fork that followed. And something like 95 out of 100 CEOs raised their hands and said, we support this. And those that were in the developer community did not, because there was this idea of prioritizing decentralization, and generally the technical community did not like the approach of kicking the can down the road. They wanted the layered approach. And lo and behold, it didn't happen. And at the end of the day, it came down to a question of who controlled Bitcoin, or who controls it. And ultimately, the conclusion that I came to is both no one and everyone.
Right.
There's not a single person that controls Bitcoin, but it is an entire community, and of course, there are the economic nodes and the market and all of that. But this actually showed that a small group of people could not control the protocol. And in fact, so a good friend of mine, Lynn Alden, some of you may have heard of her work, she wrote a great book called Broken Money, has repeatedly discussed the fact that this led her to have conviction in Bitcoin because there was not a small group of people that could just implement a change, and because you had the strength of this community that was able to, say, ultimately prevail within this backstory. So, long story short, we did get this soft fork upgrade eventually. There were a number of people that were opposed to it because they saw it as a competing means of having a block size increase. This did increase an effective block size, but it did it in a different manner that was basically a virtual increase by removing the witness, and that enabled the ability to have Lightning on mainnet.
Right, and that was kind of like, I guess, like phase one of innovation. And if we think about the two large communities,
innovation and drama, because Bitcoin people love drama.
Yes, that's true.
I guess crypto people generally.
Crypto likes drama in general. But I think if you think about like the two primary use cases of Bitcoin, which is like store of value and payments, store of value, and there's a large camp that believes in Bitcoin as store of value, and they like storing their value. This SegWit kind of soft fork really enabled the latter, which is payments, and that's kind of a lot of what you've been focusing on. But at the same time, like you mentioned, there's this resistance to change and this difficulty to change, which also in some ways makes it really amenable to being money, right? Because people want reliability in money overall. Which is different to, like, if something isn't reliable and it's constantly changing, then people might not trust it as this, like, store of value, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, the Bitcoin developer community has a variety of philosophies that differ from, say, other communities out there in the crypto world. And if you think about, say, the Silicon Valley adage of move fast and break things, in the Bitcoin developer community, the idea is to proceed cautiously and build a secure base layer. And the idea is that the experimentation should be on higher layers, and the community wants to be as cautious as possible on the base layer. Now, of course, people can disagree as to what to do with the base layer, right? And we've heard in prior talks about a number of proposed soft forks to Bitcoin, including ones that enable covenants. We've heard about opcat. People are memeing this with their cat memes. And there are a variety of people that want Bitcoin to be more functional within the bounds of not being Turing complete. And importantly, Satoshi, the original creator of Bitcoin, intentionally did not want to make Bitcoin Turing complete at the base layer. Now we have BitVM and other technologies that enable this in this, different means that isn't actually like at the Bitcoin base layer. And the reason why is because complexity is the enemy of security, and the goal of Bitcoin is to be this decentralized money and not necessarily a world computer. We have a variety of other protocols that are going for the decentralized compute and world computer angle. But one of the things that we've seen emerge, especially in the last 6 to 9 months, is people building more computational, say, off-chain projects, side chains, quote-unquote layer 2s, around Bitcoin, but with the Bitcoin philosophy of maintaining the security at the base layer, which is key to the development philosophy of the community.
And this came rate explosion that we've now seen with layer 1/layer 1 extensions and layer 2s, that's relatively recent since Taproot, basically, right? 2017 SegWit until now, kind of things were relatively stable. Well, I guess in the Lightning side of things, what were the applications that people were I guess using Lightning Network for beyond just payments?
Yeah, so for those that may not be as familiar, Lightning is fully operational today. We've got 350 plus million of BTC deployed on the network, and importantly, you cannot really compare that number to say a DeFi protocol, because on Lightning, you want funds to move as quickly as possible, because the way that the nodes, and we've got 10, 15,000 nodes operating on the network, and it's decentralized because all of those nodes we need to go down for the network to go down, is that nodes earn fees when funds move. If funds are just staying put, that's actually not beneficial for those that are on the network. So in theory, you could have 350 million and have $1 billion transacting every minute or two. Now, you would have to have a lot of efficiency of the liquidity on the network, because Lightning has directional channels where you have to have funds in the direction to both send and receive, which is a whole other topic that I'm happy to discuss at some point. But at a high level, Lightning is a transaction and payment network, right? Okay. And the way that it's evolved is, okay, so we have a variety of use cases, everything from, say, creator economy to trading and exchanges to payments cross-border. There are some very cool AI-related use cases. We have a protocol that my co-founder Lalo developed called L402, like the HTTP 402 error code, payment required, that authenticates a payment with, say, an API call. You could just pay, and then the API call can execute, and you don't actually have to have, say, a username, a password, an account, and so on. So you have the ability to have a degree of programmable payments, but Lightning at its core is a value and transaction layer, and not a computation layer. But interestingly, what we've seen, and we at Lightning Labs try to be on top of all the latest developments, and there's a lot going on in the Bitcoin world and in the broader community, is people bringing greater computation to Bitcoin. Now, importantly, I want to note that the Lightning Network is an open standard. Right. We at Lightning Labs have built the leading implementation, but there are a number of others, Core Lightning, LDK, there's one called Eclair out of France, so on and so forth. And we have built out a specification, a spec. It's called the Bolt spec. In fact, there's a meeting happening in Japan in September where the variety of protocol developers are getting together to then talk about the evolution of the specification. And anyone can come and build an implementation of Lightning, which I think is key and differs from a lot of the evolution of other layer 2s out there where there's only one implementation, and there's likely a disincentive from people to build another implementation. Maybe there's a token or a walled garden, so to speak. And we're big believers in open standards and open protocols, drawing from the internet and the principles of the internet, and that the ability for anybody to come and build their own implementation keeps people on their toes and makes you constantly, building better features and listening to the developer community and having good APIs and so on and so forth. So that is part of the ethos of the Lightning community.
Right.
But talking about all the new developments that you mentioned, the goal for Lightning is both to be this value transaction layer. People are using it, globally for payments, and especially, by the way, in emerging markets. El Salvador made Bitcoin legal tender in 2021. They required businesses to accept Bitcoin, and Lightning was a big part of that. You could then go to like major, chains and stores, pay with Lightning. It was super cool. We were like shocked at that point. We were, a nation is making this legal tender, and they're using our technology. Pretty cool. But it also functions as an interoperability layer because you have this open standard where when you have these other off-chain projects, say, a ZK, Rollup, a computation layer, there are a variety of them that are in the process of being built. I believe, they're largely not yet shipped for mainnet. People need to be able to talk to each other. Users that are going to use, say, one Rollup here, or say one like a Spider chain or a Xiaomi eCash mint there. Lightning serves as this interoperability layer because if you have to go back to the Bitcoin chain, well, then you're subject to, the high fees,
right,
speed issues, so on and so forth, right? Obviously, scalability limitations. With Lightning, there's not actually a technical upper bound for something like transactions per second. It depends on nodes on the network, it depends on liquidity factors, but the goal is to enable many, many, thousands, hundreds, so on, of thousands of transactions per second, and to do so instantly with incredibly low fees.
Right. So whereas these kind of L2s, well, I guess the L1's extensions, we'll set them aside. That's like ordinals, runes. But in terms of like the L2 specifically that are looking to build applications on top of Bitcoin, that's not really competitive then to Lightning. And Lightning's moving more from a purely a means of kind of like sending these cash flows bidirectionally towards being that interop layer, almost like a layer 0 for the Bitcoin
Maybe
L2s.
It's a combination of layer 0 and 2, depending upon what kind of layers you're talking about. And by the way, when it comes to the definition of a layer 2, I do believe that a layer 2 should have what we call unilateral exit, which means you don't have to trust a counterparty to get your funds off of it, but that is somewhat of a controversial topic within the technical community. But to us, a layer 2 has unilateral exit. Lightning has a unilateral exit. You don't have to trust anybody. You can go back to the Bitcoin blockchain and get your funds back using contracts and time locks.
So this really like increases the overall utility and adoption, hopefully, of Lightning, the Lightning network in the coming future. I guess like as you think about and look at again, both the L1s and the L2s, there are a number of like different focus areas that we're seeing here. There's much more, like you look at ordinals, runes, that's going more towards like the luxury space and NFTs, and you want a Bugatti, and it's people that have accumulated a lot of Bitcoin that want to then kind of use Bitcoin for something. You then have like the Babylons of the world that are like, okay, well, let's use this Bitcoin as a stake to secure networks. And then you have like, on the flip side, kind of more the applications, games, which I think are more for like mass markets, and that seems like a more similar market towards what Lightning Labs has potentially been trying to like go after or like gain traction on. What excites you, and I guess like where do you think there should be, or where would you want to see more innovation?
So I was chatting with one of our investors who's a friend of mine, and we often go back and forth, and this was last year, and we were saying, okay, what are going to be the big narratives for the next cycle? And we agreed it was going to be layer 2s and stablecoins. And lo and behold, it seems like two major narratives of this cycle are layer 2s and stablecoins. And if you think about, use cases, and something I often say to my team is, we want to solve real problems for real people, and who needs this technology and why? And as much as I love all the development and zero knowledge proofs and all that, I do think it's very important for the community to think about, okay, how is this going to impact the world, the economy, real people, people's lives, and so on. And I always try to bring my team back to that, be it, we build developer infrastructure, but then downstream, what are those developers building for their end users? And one thing that is undeniable is there's massive demand globally for stablecoins. Right? So we just had a report that came out from Tether. They made a very large profit, 5.2 billion, in the first half of this year. But significantly, Tether holds now more treasuries, US treasuries, than major nations like Germany, Australia, United Arab Emirates. I mean, this is globally significant and geopolitically significant. And why do people want this? Well, a lot of the world might live in hyperinflationary environments. Their currency might have issues. They want to hold their value in what they consider to be a stable store of value, and that today is dollars for them. Right. So 2 weeks ago today, we did a major release of a protocol that we developed using the Taproot upgrade to Bitcoin called Taproot Assets that enabled the Lightning portion of assets both on Bitcoin using Taproot and then over Lightning. So credit to my brilliant co-founder, Lalu, aka Roast Beef, no tea, the fastest talker you will ever encounter. Some of you, if you've heard of him, you have to put him at 0.5x. Who came up with this design using the Taproot upgrade to Bitcoin. And this is one of the really interesting things when it comes to, say, Bitcoin upgrades. It's going to enable new ideas and new creativity that people didn't think about prior to it existing. And then constraint also breeds creativity and innovation. Sometimes if you can do anything, you might not come up with an idea, as opposed to having a constraint where Bitcoin intentionally, Satoshi etched it into the protocol where there is a constraint, right? So we've built out a protocol for multi-asset, both Bitcoin on-chain and Lightning. It's not like, say, runes and inscriptions where you're just inscribing JSON data in the chain and then your fees are spiking up to $100. Like, it is designed to be both chain efficient and then on the Lightning front to enable instant high-volume transactions with incredibly low fees. So I'm excited about onboarding, people globally, especially if you look at in emerging markets where there's massive demand for things like stablecoins onto the Bitcoin blockchain, using the security of the Bitcoin chain, which is the most secure blockchain, has the most liquidity, the most value, and then bringing it onto Lightning. And importantly, transactions of these assets that are on Lightning route through Bitcoin. Yeah. So Bitcoin becomes a global routing currency. And then we talk about off-chain projects, layer 2s, and all the new computation coming to Bitcoin. All of those projects want Bitcoin native assets, and especially Bitcoin native stablecoins for the use cases that we're talking about. So we want to create, again, an open interoperable standard that people are going to use for any new innovation happening on top of Bitcoin, and then globally around the world, people are transacting because we know there's demand for dollars. We know also once people get, say, a stablecoin, they're going to get interested in Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. They're likely going to want some Bitcoin as well. And it makes a lot of sense for Bitcoin to have these types of transactions and these types of assets.
Awesome. Elizabeth, we're at time, but thank you. Could go on this for like another half hour. So thanks again for your time. Thanks for coming up.
Thank you.